Hey guys, today we will talk about Rune and Raisin by Leigh Bardugo. This fantasy adventure novel was published back in 2014 and it is the third and the last book in the Shadow and Bone trilogy. It is also the third book in the Grishaverse series. As per usual, we will start this review with a short synopsis, then continue to a non-spoiler review and finish the video with the spoilers. If you haven't read this book yet, then do not worry, I will make sure to let you know when the spoilers begin. However, all of this video will include spoilers from Shadow and Bone and Season Storm. Since you clicked on this video, I have to assume that you are already familiar with the events of the first two books in the Shadow and Bone trilogy. Also, if you're interested in Grishaverse, then make sure to check out my reviews on Shadow and Bone and on Season Storm. Alright, so let's start with a short synopsis. The book begins almost where the last one left off. After the sudden invasion of Osalta, the Darkling easily manages to breach all of the defenses put in place by the Allies and takes back Ravka's throne. However, he is greatly injured and nearly dies in the process. While Alina, Mal, and her followers, despite being able to inflict significant damage, now are banished from Osalta and are hiding in underground tunnels under the protection of Apparat and Zealots, who believe Alina to be the saint. Alina, though safe from Darkling in the White Castle, is also more of a prisoner than a guest. She's forced to stay away from her friends, is under constant supervision, and is forced to pretend to be an actual saint in front of the worshippers who come to their aid in the end of the second book. But worst of all, she is unable to use her power, as there's no sunlight so deep underground. The fight with the Darkling left her significantly weakened, and without summoning her Grisha power, she's getting more sickly by the day. Since this is a continuation of a story rather than a standalone novel, I can't really go too detailed into the synopsis before I will start recapping the plot. So instead, let's just proceed to the non-spoiler review. If you have seen my previous videos, then you know how big of a sucker I am for the Grishaverse. Rune and Raisin was definitely not an exception. If anything, it's hands down my favorite book of the Shadow and Bone trilogy. However, even I have to admit that the beginning of this book felt somewhat weird for me. I'm talking about the first 100 pages or so. It felt somewhat slow-paced, even though the things kept on happening pretty much non-stop and the main characters did not spend too much time in one location. I think the reason for this might have been the fact that these events that kept on happening did not hold too much of a value in the big picture. As well as the story of we are trapped among the bad guys, we have to find a way to escape, was a little bit redundant by that point. In addition to that, I got quite surprised because at times for me it almost felt that Alina actually seemed to start seeing herself as a saint, which in my opinion was completely out of character for her. But anyhow, then Nikolai showed up and the story once again became infinitely better. I mean, is it just me, or Nikolai seems to be a solution to almost every problem? You got abducted? Nikolai will save you. You're being attacked? Here comes Nikolai. You need a special, super safe, off-the-grid, yet incredibly fancy secret bunker to hide out in? Of course, Nikolai has you covered. And honestly, I can't even be mad about Nikolai Ex Machina because I have a great affection for him. Nikolai is simply awesome. Maybe you are wondering who else is great in this book? I'll tell you, it's Mal. Mal is great in this book. Trust me, I know I did not expect to say this myself, as I was never a big fan of him as a character or as a love interest for Alina. But while reading Rune and Rising for the first time in the whole Shadow and Bone trilogy, I believed that these two are actually in love. Up until now, I felt like Leigh Bardugo just told us that Alina and Mal love each other, and that's it. They have history together, they have been in love for as long as they can remember, and we as readers should just take that as a fact. No questions asked. But in this book, I actually got to see how they behave, what they do for one another, even when they're not technically together. I got to see Mal sacrifice his love in order to give Alina what she really needs. He embraced her powers and found a way to help her, be useful instead of feeling sorry for himself. And yes, Mal did things for Alina before this book too. He deserted the army, he tracked down the stag, he moved to Osalta with her, and so on. But even doing those things, he always felt like a sad, tortured soul. Like someone else is forcing him to do these things and they make him eternally unhappy. In Rune and Raisin, we finally saw him take charge of his own life, and it was beautiful. Overall, for me, this book felt like a great ending to the trilogy. The author neatly closed the majority of the open questions, leaving some of the plot lines open for the sequels. She navigated well the character development, she made me feel things that I never thought possible, she made me feel sad for the Darkling, she made me enjoy reading about Mal, and probably weirdest of all, she made me appreciate Zoya for the badass that she is. Anyhow, if you haven't had the chance to read this book yet, then I would advise you to stop this video now, as we need to talk about the end of the trilogy. And we can't do that without the spoilers. Before we dig into my thoughts about the ending of this book, I just have to take a moment to say something very important. Alina and Darkling have chemistry. I mean, don't get me wrong, I still think that the history they share is way too toxic to grow into a healthy relationship, as well as I am still bothered about the age difference and the power dynamic between the two, but oh my. I can see why a lot of weird fanfictions about Alina and Darkling would be popping out there. Anyhow, the ending. Honestly, when I started reading the book, I still wasn't sure how I wanted it to end. I guess my first instinct was to hope that Leigh Bardugo will not take an easy way out and finish this book with "they lived happily ever after," just because it is a book written for a young adult audience. I think for me personally, a good ending for the trilogy would have been something in between the sugar-coated fairy tale and Darkling taking over the world. I wanted Darkling dead, but I also wanted Alina having to sacrifice herself in the process. I mean, I didn't even expect Mal to survive. I kept on thinking that Mal's devotion to Alina just has to end with both of them dying on the battlefield. In my eyes, that would have been for the best, because Alina could never live a normal life even if she survives due to the whole being the same thing, and as for Mal, he could never truly forgive himself if he survived but Alina died trying to save others. And I thought I was ready for this ending. 3 out of 4 main characters being dead. It seemed fair to me. And the closer I got to the final of the book, the more upset I felt about this idea. First Baghra and so many others die while trying to escape the Darkling once more. Then Nikolai gets cursed and turned into this monster. Then Mal is being put in the position where he knows that he needs to sacrifice himself in order for Alina to obtain the ultimate power. And then Alina, while losing the final battle, actually ends up killing him and losing her powers in the process. I mean, by then I felt my own heart break a little. So by the time Leigh Bardugo started reversing all of this nightmare into a positive, maybe cliche happy ending, I was so up for it. I saw all the bad things that could have happened actually happening to the characters I grew to love, and all I wanted to do was to take them out of the story and coddle them to make it all better. Overall, I feel like Leigh Bardugo wrapped up the story quite perfectly. Every major character in the book got something they deserved and longed for. Nikolai became a king, a really kind-hearted, smart and ingenious one, a true ruler that Ravka deserves. Zoya takes over the lead of the Second Army, and Jenny is finally accepted and appreciated for her special set of powers. Even the Darkling got a good ending. Well, maybe good is not the correct word here, but I truly enjoyed how Leigh Bardugo did not make him into an unredeemable monster. Yes, he did cruel things. He manipulated people, he turned his back on his followers, killed his own mother, and then got blinded by the power. But at the same time, he was also shown to be a human being who believed in his cause and who was destroyed by the long, lonely life. Actually, if you enjoy the Darkling as a character, I would highly recommend you to read a super short prequel story about Darkling called The Demon in the Wood. I feel like reading it after finishing the book really helped me to understand Darkling and his motivations better. And most importantly, Alina and Mal got to have the life they always wanted. I loved reading the last chapters that described the time after the Civil War, knowing that Alina and Mal were together and were happy, living the simple life while being surrounded by such extraordinary group of friends. That brought me peace. But that's just my opinion. What about yours?